The Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth, turning the once green prairie grass into brittle stalks that crumbled at the slightest touch. Jacob Thornton wiped the sweat from his brow with a dusty sleeve, squinting against the harsh glare as he surveyed his land. The drought had been going on for 3 months now, and each day seemed to suck more life from the already struggling ranch. He stood alone on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, the wood creaking beneath his boots. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional whisper of hot wind through the dead grass. It was a silence he'd grown accustomed to these past 3 years, ever since Martha had succumbed to the fever. The house behind him stood as empty as his heart felt, rooms that once echoed with laughter now holding nothing but shadows and memories. Jacob was 32, though the harsh Wyoming climate and the weight of loss had etched lines into his face that made him appear older. His hands, calloused from years of working cattle and mending fences, trembled slightly as he pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. He'd been carrying it for days, reading and rereading the words he'd carefully penned. "Dear marriage broker," he'd written in his methodical script. "I am a rancher in Willow Creek, Wyoming territory, seeking a wife for practical purposes. I am not looking for beauty or romance. I need a plain, hard-working woman who can help with the daily tasks of running a ranch. Someone sturdy and reliable who understands that this arrangement is born of necessity, not sentiment. I can offer a roof over her head, 3 meals a day, and respectful treatment, nothing more, nothing less." The words seemed harsh even to him, but Jacob couldn't bring himself to soften them. He'd loved once, deeply and completely, and when Martha died, she'd taken that part of him with her. What remained was a man who needed help surviving in this unforgiving land. Nothing more. He walked the half-mile to the edge of his property where the mailbox stood, a lonely sentinel by the dusty road. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and the town of Willow Creek another 10 beyond that. Out here, a man could go weeks without seeing another soul if he chose to, and Jacob had chosen exactly that for far too long. As he placed the letter in the box and raised the red flag, he couldn't help but remember the last time he'd stood in this spot with purpose. Martha had been beside him then, her hand warm in his as they'd mailed invitations to their wedding. That had been 5 years ago, when the land was green and hope grew as readily as the wildflowers she'd loved. "Just someone plain," he murmured to himself as he began the walk back. "No complications, no feelings, just survival." The wind picked up, swirling dust devils across the barren landscape. Jacob pulled his hat lower and leaned into the gale. Around him, the fence posts stood like grave markers, and in the distance, he could see the small cemetery plot where Martha lay. He hadn't visited in months, couldn't bear to see her headstone standing alone in the family plot they'd planned to fill with the markers of children and grandchildren. That evening, as the brutal sun finally began its descent, Jacob sat at his kitchen table with a cup of bitter coffee and his ledger. The numbers weren't good. Without rain, without help, he'd lose the ranch by winter. His cattle were growing thin, the well was running low, and he was just one man trying to do the work of 3. He thought about the marriage brokers back east, those agencies that matched desperate souls across the vast distances of the frontier. He'd heard stories in town, some successful, others ending in disappointment or worse, but what choice did he have? The proper ladies in Willow Creek had long since written him off as too damaged, too withdrawn, and he couldn't blame them. What woman would want a man who looked at her and saw only the ghost of another? "Lord," he prayed that night, kneeling beside his narrow bed, "send me someone plain, someone who won't stir up what's dead inside me, someone who understands that some hearts are too broken to mend. Let her be plain, nothing more, nothing less." The weeks that followed passed in a blur of endless chores and deepening worry. The drought continued its stranglehold on the land. Cattle died. The vegetable garden Martha had lovingly tended turned to dust. Jacob threw himself into work from dawn to dusk. trying not to think about the letter he'd sent or what manner of woman might answer such a cold proposition. It was 6 weeks later when he made his monthly trip to town for supplies. The general store was bustling with the usual crowd of ranchers and townfolk, all discussing the drought and its devastating effects. Jacob kept his head down, focusing on gathering the meager supplies he could afford. Thornton, the telegraph operator, a wiry man named Pete Hutchins, called out to him. "Got a wire for you. Been sitting here 2 days." Jacob's heart skipped. He hadn't received a telegraph in years. With hands that suddenly felt clumsy, he took the thin slip of paper and read the brief message. "Bride arriving Tuesday noon stop meet at station stop agency." The words swam before his eyes. Tuesday, that was tomorrow. His letter had found someone, some plain woman willing to travel across the country to marry a stranger. He should feel relief, he told himself. This was what he wanted, what he needed. Yet, as he walked out of the store, the telegraph clutched in his hand. He felt only a deep, gnawing dread. That night, Jacob barely slept. He cleaned the house as best he could, sweeping away 3 years of bachelor neglect. He pulled Martha's things from the closet, packing them carefully into a trunk that he stored in the barn. The new woman, his bride, would need the space. The word felt foreign on his tongue. Bride. As if this arrangement bore any resemblance to what he'd had with Martha. As dawn broke over the drought-stricken land, Jacob stood before his small mirror and tried to make himself presentable. His best shirt was frayed at the cuffs, his boots worn but clean. He looked like what he was, a struggling rancher with more pride than prosperity. Would she be disappointed? Did it matter? "Let her be plain," he whispered once more to his reflection. Like a prayer or a ward against something he couldn't name. Just plain and practical. Nothing more. He hitched his old mare to the wagon and began the long journey to town, toward a future he'd invited but didn't truly want, driven by necessity and the brutal arithmetic of survival in a land that seemed determined to break everyone who dared to call it home. The entire town of Willow Creek seemed to have gathered at the train station, their curiosity as thick as the dust clouds stirring in the noon heat. Jacob had hoped to collect his bride quietly, without fanfare, but he should have known better. In a town starved for entertainment, the arrival of a mail-order bride was an event worthy of the Harvest Festival. Well, Thornton's finally getting himself a new woman," called out Sam Mackenzie from the platform, his voice carrying over the crowd. "About time you stopped living like a hermit." Jacob pulled his hat lower and tried to ignore the stares and whispers. Women clustered together, fans fluttering despite the heat, their eyes sharp with speculation. Men lounged against the station walls, placing bets on what manner of desperate woman would answer such an advertisement. "Heard tell she's coming from Baltimore." "Mrs. Abigail Patterson announced to her circle of friends, her voice pitched to carry, "What kind of woman leaves a civilized city for this?" She gestured at the drought-stricken landscape with disdain. Jacob had dressed in his best, the black wool suit he'd worn to Martha's funeral, now loose on his frame from 3 years of poor appetite. His boots were polished, his face freshly shaven, though he knew he still looked like what he was, a man worn down by grief and hard living. He stood apart from the crowd, his hands clenched at his sides, wishing he could disappear into the scorched earth. The train whistle pierced the air, and the crowd pressed forward. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs as the great iron beast pulled into the station, belching black smoke into the cloudless sky. Through the windows, he could see the shapes of passengers gathering their belongings. His mouth went dry. In moments, he would meet the woman who had agreed to his cold proposition, some plain, practical creature who understood that this was business, not romance. The conductor stepped down first, helping passengers disembark. An elderly couple, a traveling salesman, 2 cowboys heading back to the ranches. Then the conductor reached up again, taking a gloved hand in his. Jacob's first glimpse was of a traveling dress in deep blue wool, simple but well made. Then came the woman herself, and the crowd fell silent. She was young, perhaps 25, with hair the color of honey pinned neatly beneath a modest hat. Her face was oval and fine-featured, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. But it was her eyes that struck him like a physical blow, large and gray as storm clouds, fringed with dark lashes, holding an expression of determined calm despite the scrutiny of the entire town. This was no plain woman. This was beauty itself stepping onto the dusty platform of Willow Creek, and Jacob felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crack.
"Dear God,"
someone whispered behind him.
"She's lovely."
The woman, his bride, he reminded himself with growing panic, stood on the platform, a single carpetbag in her hand. Her gaze swept the crowd until it found him, and somehow she knew. Perhaps it was the funeral suit or the way he stood apart from the others, but she walked toward him with quiet grace, her boots clicking on the wooden boards. "Mr. Thornton." Her voice was soft but clear, carrying a faint Eastern accent. "I'm Emma Foster." He couldn't speak. His tongue felt thick and useless in his mouth. This was wrong, all wrong. He'd asked for plain. He'd begged for plain. Instead, he got this vision who would surely complicate everything, who would make him feel things he'd sworn never to feel again. He cleared his throat, painfully aware of the town watching. "Yes, I'm Jacob Thornton." She extended her hand, and he took it automatically. Even through her glove, he could feel the warmth of her skin, and he dropped the contact as quickly as courtesy allowed. Behind them, the whispers had started in earnest. "Look at her. What's she running from?" A beauty like that could have any man. Why choose this arrangement? "Something's not right. Mark my words, there's scandal here." Emma's chin lifted slightly, but she gave no other sign that she heard the gossip. Her gray eyes remained fixed on his face, studying him with an intelligence that made him want to look away. "Shall we?" she asked simply. Jacob nodded. Reaching for her bag, she surrendered it without protest and followed him toward his wagon. The crowd parted before them, but the stares followed, heavy with judgment and speculation. "That's Martha's replacement," he heard Mrs. Patterson hiss. "That creature will have every man in town sniffing around the Thornton place. You mark my words, there'll be trouble." Jacob helped Emma into the wagon, his hands careful not to linger at her waist. She settled her skirts and sat straight-backed on the hard bench, looking neither left nor right as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. The journey out of town felt eternal. Neither spoke as the wagon rolled past the storefronts and houses, past the church where he'd married Martha, past the small schoolhouse where their children would have learned to read. The silence between them was different from the silence he'd grown used to. This one was alive with unspoken questions and the weight of mutual disappointment. Only when they'd left the last building behind did Emma finally speak. "You expected someone different." It wasn't a question. Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. "I was specific in my requirements." "Yes, plain, hard-working, practical." She recited the words with neither bitterness nor amusement. "I assure you, Mr. Thornton, appearances can be deceiving. I am both hard-working and practical. As for plain," she touched her face briefly, a gesture that seemed unconsciously defensive. "That is unfortunately beyond my control." "Why?" The word escaped before he could stop it. "Why would you answer such an advertisement you could have?" He gestured helplessly. Could have what? Now there was an edge to her voice. Married well in Baltimore, lived a life of ease. She turned to look at the barren landscape stretching endlessly before them. "Expectations are luxuries I can no longer afford. Mr. Thornton, you need help with your ranch. I need—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I need a place where I can work honestly for my keep, where I won't be seen as an ornament or a commodity." The word hung between them, heavy with implications he didn't want to examine. They rode in silence for several more miles, the sun beating down mercilessly. the dust rising in clouds behind them.
Your letter was honest,
Emma said finally.
harsh, perhaps, but honest. You want no romantic entanglement. Neither do I. You need someone strong enough to help you survive out here.
I may not look like much, Mr. Thornton, but I assure you, I know how to work. I know how to survive. He glanced at her then, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the way she didn't flinch from the brutal sun or complain about the dust. Her hands, he noticed, bore faint calluses inconsistent with a life of leisure. Whatever had driven her here, it had already begun to harden her. The town will talk, he warned. They're already talking. Let them. The words were quiet but firm.
I've heard worse.
As the ranch came into view, the weathered house, the struggling garden, the two thin cattle in the distance, Jacob felt a fresh wave of shame. What must she think, coming from Baltimore to this? But Emma simply studied the scene with those intelligent gray eyes, taking in every detail.
We'll need to do something about that well, she said, surprising him. It's too close to the livestock area, contamination risk, and that garden needs shade cloth if anything's going to survive this drought. Canvas would work, stretched on poles.
He stared at her, this beautiful woman in her traveling dress, discussing wells and gardens with the practicality of a seasoned rancher.
How do you—
My father was a farmer, she said simply. Before he lost everything, before he— She stopped herself, that defensive gesture returning. I know about survival. Mr. Thornton, perhaps more than you might guess. As he helped her down from the wagon at the house, Jacob caught her scent. Lavender soap and something uniquely her own. His body's reaction was immediate and unwanted. A stirring he thought had died with Martha. He stepped back quickly, almost stumbling. I'll show you to your room, he said roughly. We can discuss the arrangements after you've settled. Emma nodded, following him into the house that would be her home. As she crossed the threshold, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just become infinitely more complicated. He'd waited for a plain bride. Instead, the beauty who arrived made him fear not just his own desire, but something far more dangerous, the possibility that his carefully guarded heart might not be as dead as he'd believed. The first morning came harsh and early, with the rooster's crow cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Emma was already in the kitchen when Jacob emerged, the smell of coffee and biscuits filling the air. She'd found Martha's apron and wore it over a simple cotton dress, her hair pulled back in a practical bun.
I hope you don't mind,
she said, not turning from the stove.
I thought we should discuss the arrangements over breakfast.
Jacob sat heavily at the table. Disconcerted by the domesticity of the scene, the kitchen hadn't smelled like this in 3 years. What arrangements? Emma placed a plate before him. Biscuits, fried eggs, a slice of salt pork. Simple fare, but more than he'd managed for himself in months. She poured coffee and sat across from him, her gray eyes direct. Our business arrangement, she said calmly. I assume you'll want to maintain separate quarters. I'll need to know which areas of the house are mine to manage, what my daily responsibilities will be, and what boundaries you wish to establish. Her frank approach caught him off guard. Yes, the room you slept in last night is yours. As for the rest, he gestured vaguely. The house, the kitchen garden, the chickens, I'll handle the cattle and the heavy work. I can help with the cattle. I'm stronger than I look. That won't be necessary.
Mr. Thornton.
She set down her coffee cup with quiet firmness. If this arrangement is to work, you need to accept my help fully, not just in the ways that make you comfortable. I didn't travel 1,000 miles to be decorative. Over the following days, they established a rhythm. Emma rose before dawn, preparing breakfast and packing lunch for the long days ahead. She attacked the neglected garden with surprising vigor, hauling water from the well, building shade structures from old canvas and fence posts. When Jacob protested, she simply fixed him with that steady gray gaze and continued working. The town's curiosity, however, refused to abate. Each trip for supplies became an ordeal of whispers and stares. The women were the worst, clustering together like hens, their words carrying on the wind. Did you see how she looked at Tom Bradley Bold as brass? That dress might be plain, but it can't hide what's underneath. She knows exactly what she's doing. Poor Jacob, lost in grief and now saddled with a woman who'll bring nothing but trouble. Emma bore it all with remarkable composure, conducting her business with quiet efficiency. Only Jacob noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she counted out coins at the general store, how her jaw tightened when Mrs. Patterson deliberately turned away from her greeting. It was on their third trip to town that things escalated. They'd stopped at the Mercantile for fence wire when Ben Morrison, a ranch hand from the Double K, approached. He was young, handsome in a rough way, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "Afternoon, Mrs. Thornton," he said, tipping his hat low, his eyes traveling over Emma in a way that made Jacob's fists clench. "Mighty fine day, isn't it?" "Mr. Morrison," Emma replied coolly, continuing to examine the wire. "Must be quite a change from Baltimore. Bet you missed the parties, the dancing." He moved closer, close enough that Emma had to step back. "Be a shame to waste all that beauty on ranch work. If you ever need companionship, or want to remember what it's like to have some fun." "The lady's not interested," Jacob growled, stepping between them. Morrison's smile was mocking. "Just being neighborly, Thornton. Can't blame a man for appreciating what's right in front of him, though I gotta say, seems a waste. A woman like that in a business arrangement." He emphasized the last words, making them sound sordid. Emma placed a hand on Jacob's arm before he could respond. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the kind of steel Jacob hadn't heard before. "I appreciate your concern for my entertainment. However, I find my current situation entirely satisfactory. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." She turned away, dismissing him as thoroughly as any society lady might dismiss an unsuitable suitor. Morrison's face reddened, but he retreated, though not before shooting Jacob a look that promised this wasn't over. That night, the wolves came. Jacob woke to their howling, closer to the house than they'd ever ventured. He grabbed his rifle and headed for the door, only to find Emma already there. Martha's old shotgun in her hands, still in her nightgown with a shawl thrown over her shoulders. "I heard them too," she said simply. "Get back inside. I'll handle this. 2 guns are better than 1. She checked the shotgun with practiced movements. "Unless you object to a woman who knows how to shoot." They stood guard together on the porch, watching the darkness where yellow eyes gleamed. The wolves circled, testing, but the presence of 2 armed humans kept them at bay. Emma never flinched, never showed fear, even when a particularly bold wolf crept close enough for them to see its ribs showing through patchy fur. "The drought's hitting them too," she observed quietly. "Desperate creatures do desperate things." "Yes," Jacob agreed, thinking she might not be talking only about wolves. After an hour, the pack melted away into the darkness. As they went back inside, Jacob caught himself watching the way Emma moved, the fall of her hair over her shoulder, the curve of her neck in the lamplight. He forced himself to look away. "Thank you," he said roughly. "For the help?" "It's what partners do," she replied, and something in the word partners made his chest tight. The next morning brought a new challenge. The well, already low, produced only muddy water. Jacob stared at it in despair. Without water. They were finished, but Emma studied the land with those thoughtful gray eyes, walking the property in ever-widening circles. "There,"
she finally said, pointing to a spot near a cluster of stunted cottonwoods. The trees are still alive, which means water. And see how the land dips underground stream, most likely. Jacob was skeptical but desperate. They spent 3 days digging in the brutal heat, their hands blistered and backs aching. Emma worked alongside him without complaint, her fine features smudged with dirt, her dress soaked with sweat. On the 3rd day, when the shovel finally hit damp earth, she let out a cry of triumph that transformed her face, making her impossibly more beautiful. They dug faster, and suddenly water clear, cold water was seeping into the hole. Emma laughed, a sound of pure joy that Jacob hadn't heard in his house in 3 years. Without thinking, he caught her up in a hug, spinning her around as they celebrated. For a moment, she was soft and warm in his arms, fitting against him perfectly. Then reality crashed back. He set her down abruptly, stepping away. "I apologize, that was inappropriate." Her face had flushed, but not with embarrassment. "Jacob," she began, then stopped. "No, you're right. We should start hauling water for the animals." That night, as they ate dinner in careful silence, Jacob couldn't stop remembering the feel of her in his arms, the way she'd said his name, not Mr. Thornton, but Jacob, soft and wondering. "I should go to town tomorrow," Emma said finally. "We need supplies for a proper wellhead." "I'll go with you." "That's not necessary. I can handle—" "After Morrison yesterday, no." His tone brooked no argument. "We go together or not at all." She studied him across the table. "All right, together, then." The word hung between them, weighted with more meaning than either would acknowledge. Outside, the wolves howled again, but somehow the sound seemed less threatening with 2 people to face it. Emma rose to check the windows, and Jacob watched her move through his house, their house, with increasing familiarity. He'd wanted a plain bride, a simple business arrangement. Instead, he'd gotten Emma Foster, who was neither plain nor simple, who could shoot wolves and find water and stand up to crude men without losing her dignity. Emma Foster, who was beginning to make him feel things he'd sworn never to feel again. As she bid him good night and retired to her room, Martha's room, he couldn't help thinking. Jacob remained at the table, staring at the spot where she'd sat. The boundaries they'd so carefully established were already blurring, and he didn't know whether to reinforce them or let them fall. In her room, Emma sat at the small desk, writing in her journal by lamplight. "He spun me around today when we found water," she wrote. "For a moment, I forgot to be careful. For a moment, I was just a woman in the arms of a man who made me feel safe. I cannot afford such moments. I came here to escape being wanted for the wrong reasons, only to find myself wanting for reasons I dare not name. We are partners, nothing more. It must remain so." But as she lay in the narrow bed, listening to Jacob's footsteps in the room below, Emma wondered if some boundaries, once crossed in the heart, could never truly be rebuilt. The storm clouds gathered on the horizon like a promise, dark and heavy with potential. Jacob and Emma stood on the porch, watching the sky with the desperate hope of those who'd endured too many waterless days. The air grew thick and electric, and suddenly, with a crack of thunder that shook the earth, the rain began to fall. It started as fat, scattered drops, then became a downpour that turned the dusty ground to mud within minutes. Emma let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. Stepping off the porch into the deluge, she raised her face to the sky, arms spread wide, spinning in the rain like a child. Her dress clung to her form. Her hair came loose from its pins, and she was radiant with joy. "It's rain, Jacob," she called over the thunder. "Real rain." Something broke inside him at the sight of her. This woman who'd found water when he'd given up hope, who stood guard against wolves, who faced the town's cruelty with dignity. Before he could think better of it, he was out in the rain with her, catching her hands as she spun. They stood there, soaked to the skin,
Hands clasped, and the laughter died on Emma's lips. The air between them crackled with more than lightning. Jacob watched a droplet trace down her cheek, following the curve of her jaw, and found himself reaching to brush it away. "We should go inside," Emma whispered, but she didn't move. "Yes," he agreed, not moving either. Thunder crashed again, breaking the spell. They ran for the house, laughing breathlessly. Inside, Emma shivered, and Jacob stoked the fire, bringing her a blanket, as she sat before the flames, wringing water from her hair. The warmth and intimacy of the moment overwhelmed him. "I'll make coffee," he said gruffly, needing distance. But Emma caught his sleeve. "Jacob, wait, please, I think we need to talk." He sank into the chair across from her, maintaining careful space between them. "About what?" "About this." She gestured between them. "About what we're both trying so hard not to feel." "Emma!" "No, please, let me speak." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I came here under false pretenses. Not lies, exactly, but omissions. You deserve to know why someone like me would answer your advertisement." Jacob's chest tightened. "You don't owe me explanations." "I do." Her gray eyes were steady on his. "My father was Harold Foster of Foster Shipping. Perhaps you've heard of it? Everyone had, one of Baltimore's most successful companies until it collapsed 5 years ago in a spectacular bankruptcy. When the business failed, my father took his own life." Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the blanket. "My mother had died years before. I was left with nothing but debts and a tarnished name. No respectable family would associate with us. No decent man would offer marriage." "Emma..." "But Charles Whitman would." The name came out bitter. "He held most of my father's debts. He offered to forgive them in exchange for an arrangement. I would become his wife in all but name, expected to..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Expected to fulfill all wifely duties while knowing he would never actually marry me. I would be kept like a possession, with no rights and no escape." Jacob's hands clenched into fists. The thought of anyone treating Emma that way made him want to break things. "I ran," Emma continued. "I took what little money I had hidden and ran. I saw your advertisement in a newspaper at the train station. A business arrangement. You said, 'No romantic expectations.' It seemed like salvation, a chance to work honestly for my place in the world, to be valued for my labor rather than my appearance. And instead you found a broken-down ranch and a bitter man who can't even..." Jacob stopped, the words choking him. "I found a good man still grieving his wife," Emma corrected gently. "A man who treats me with respect, who works beside me as an equal, who makes me feel safe for the first time in years." She took a shuddering breath. "But also a man who makes me feel things I promised myself I wouldn't feel again. When you held me today, when we found that water, Jacob, I'm frightened." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the rain drummed steadily on the roof, a sound they'd almost forgotten. "I'm frightened too," Jacob admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep. "When Martha died, I thought that part of me died with her. I've been walking around like a ghost for 3 years, just going through the motions. Then you arrived, and suddenly I'm feeling things I don't want to feel, things that seem like a betrayal of her memory." "Would she want you to live like this?" Emma asked softly. "Alone, closed off from any chance of happiness?" "No." The admission was painful. "Martha loved life. She'd hate what I've become." He looked at Emma then, really looked at her. "But I don't know how to be any different. I don't know if I can risk that kind of pain again." Emma stood, letting the blanket fall. She crossed to him slowly, giving him time to retreat. When he didn't, she knelt beside his chair, not touching but close enough that he could feel her warmth.
"What if we risk it together?"
she whispered. "What if we're both broken, but maybe broken in ways that fit?" Jacob's hand moved of its own accord, fingers trembling as they touched her face. "I've been trying so hard not to want you."
"I know."
She leaned into his touch.
"So have I."
The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Jacob leaned down, and Emma rose up, and their lips met in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deeper as 3 years of loneliness and weeks of denied attraction crashed over them like the storm outside. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Emma's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This changes everything," Jacob said roughly.
"Yes,"
She didn't try to deny it.
but Jacob, I need you to know I won't be owned, not by anyone, ever again. If we do this, it has to be as equals,
Real partners, not just in work but in everything. I wouldn't want it any other way. He pressed his forehead to hers. But Emma, the town already talks. If they knew about Whitman, if he comes looking,
then we'll face it together."
her voice was fierce.
"I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. Aren't you?"
He was, God help him, he was exhausted from carrying grief like a shield, from pushing away any chance of light entering his life again. Here was this remarkable woman offering to stand with him, broken pieces and all. "Together," he agreed, and sealed the promise with another kiss. They sat by the fire as the storm raged outside, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. Emma told him about her childhood, about learning farming from her father before the lure of shipping drew him away from the land. Jacob found himself sharing memories of Martha he'd locked away, not just the pain of losing her, but the joy of having loved her. "She would have liked you," he said at one point. "She always said I needed someone to challenge me, to push me out of my own stubbornness."
"I wish I could have known her."
Emma replied simply,
"She shaped the man you are. That alone tells me she was remarkable."
As the night wore on and the storm began to pass, they made their way to their separate rooms. At Emma's door, Jacob caught her hand. "We'll take this slowly," he promised. "Figure out how to be together without losing ourselves." Emma squeezed his fingers. "Slowly," she agreed.
"But Jacob."
"No more walls between us. If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly." He nodded, releasing her hand reluctantly. As her door closed, Jacob stood in the hallway of the house that had felt like a tomb for 3 years. Now, with the sound of rain on the roof and the memory of Emma's lips on his, it was beginning to feel like a home again. In her room, Emma pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. She'd fled Baltimore to escape being owned, only to find herself freely giving her heart to a grieving rancher who looked at her like she was both salvation and terror combined. The rain continued through the night, soaking into the parched earth, bringing life back to the dying land. And in the weathered house on the Wyoming plain, 2 damaged souls began the terrifying, wonderful work of learning to heal together. But even as hope bloomed with the rain, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her past wasn't done with her. Charles Whitman was not a man who gave up what he considered his property easily. The storm had brought relief from the drought, but Emma feared it might also have washed away the trail that had kept her hidden. For now, though, she pushed those fears aside. Tonight, she'd kissed Jacob Thornton in the firelight. Tonight, she'd chosen to stop running and start living. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, listening to the rain and remembering the look in Jacob's eyes, Emma allowed herself to hope. The weeks following the storm brought a tentative happiness to the ranch. The new well flowed steadily. The garden began to show green shoots, and Jacob and Emma moved around each other with a careful tenderness, learning the rhythms of being together. But in town, the whispers had become a roar. "Did you see them at the Mercantile, standing too close, looking at each other like, 'That woman has bewitched him. Poor Martha must be rolling in her grave.'" Mark my words. She's trouble. A beauty like that doesn't come to Wyoming without dark reasons. Mrs. Patterson was the worst, her righteous indignation feeding the gossip mill at every opportunity. I heard from my cousin in Baltimore, she announced to her sewing circle, loud enough for the whole general store to hear. The Foster shipping scandal. There's more to it than bankruptcy. That girl's name was connected to some very unsavory business. Emma bore it all with her chin high, but Jacob saw the toll it took, the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly after each trip to town. He wanted to protect her from it all, but she wouldn't let him. I won't hide, she told him firmly. That gives them power. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unseasonably hot for late summer, when the past finally caught up with them. Emma was in the garden, tending the tomatoes that had miraculously survived the drought, when she heard the approaching horses, multiple horses, moving with purpose. She straightened, shading her eyes, and her blood turned to ice. 3 riders approached the ranch, and even from a distance, she recognized the lead figure, the broad shoulders, the expensive black coat, the way he sat his horse like he owned the world. Charles Whitman had found her. Emma's first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. Her second was to get the shotgun, but Whitman had already seen her. He raised a hand in mock greeting, that familiar cruel smile visible even across the yard. Emma, my dear, he called as he dismounted. His 2 companions, hired guns by the look of them, staying on their horses. What a charming little farm you found yourself. Jacob emerged from the barn, taking in the scene instantly. He moved to Emma's side, his presence solid and reassuring. Gentlemen, Jacob said evenly. This is private property. State your business or move along. Whitman's pale eyes flicked over Jacob dismissively before returning to Emma. My business is with Miss Foster, or should I say, my property. He pulled a leather folder from his coat. Legal documents, Mr. Thornton, Jacob Thornton, and Miss Foster is Mrs. Thornton now. Is she? Whitman's smile widened. How convenient, though I'm afraid that changes nothing. You see, Miss Foster's father signed certain papers before his unfortunate demise, papers that make her responsible for his debts, debts that I now hold. He opened the folder, revealing official-looking documents covered in legal language. $20,000, to be precise, due in full, unless, of course, Miss Foster chooses to honor our original arrangement. Emma's voice was steady, though Jacob could feel her trembling beside him. I owe you nothing. Those debts died with my father. Did they? Whitman stepped closer, and Jacob moved to block him. The hired guns shifted in their saddles. I think any court would disagree, especially when they hear about the items that went missing from the Foster estate, valuable items that I, as primary creditor, have claim to, items that a certain young woman might have, liberated before her sudden departure. You're lying, Emma said, but her face had gone white. Am I that pearl necklace of your mother's, for instance? The one you sold in Philadelphia to fund your escape. His voice dropped to a silky threat. Theft, Miss Foster, from your creditors. That's prison time. Jacob's mind raced. He knew Emma had sold her mother's jewelry. She'd told him as much. But if Whitman could twist that into theft... What do you want? Jacob asked bluntly. What I've always wanted. What I paid for. Whitman's eyes never left Emma. Come back with me. Honor our arrangement. And all of this unpleasantness goes away. Refuse, and I'll see you in chains. After all, what's a mail-order bride but a woman for sale? I'm simply claiming what was already purchased. You bastard! Emma breathed, and Jacob had never heard such venom in her voice. Such language. Whitman tisked. That's what comes of letting a woman run wild. Don't worry, my dear. I'll soon remind you of your place. Jacob stepped forward, his hand moving to his gun. "Get off my land, now!" The hired guns straightened, hands hovering near their weapons. Whitman raised a calming hand. "No need for violence. Mr. Thornton, I'm a businessman, not a savage. I'll give you both time to consider. Say, until tomorrow noon, I'll be staying at the hotel in town. Emma knows where to find me when she comes to her senses." He moved back to his horse, mounting with practiced ease. "Oh, and Mr. Thornton, you might want to ask your wife about the fire that destroyed the Foster warehouse. Amazing how it happened just days before the bankruptcy filing. Almost like someone knew what was coming and wanted to destroy evidence." He tipped his hat mockingly and rode away, his men following. Jacob and Emma stood frozen until the dust settled. Then Emma's knees gave out. Jacob caught her, holding her as she shook.
"It's lies," she whispered. "The fire was an accident. The investigators confirmed it, and Mother's jewelry was mine to sell. He's twisting everything."
"I know." Jacob helped her to the porch, fetching water. "Emma, look at me. We'll figure this out."
"How?" Her gray eyes were desperate. "He has money, lawyers, connections. He'll destroy us both. I should go. I should—"
"No." The word came out harsher than intended. "You're not going anywhere with him."
"Jacob, you don't understand. He's ruthless. He destroyed my father, and he'll destroy you too. The ranch, everything you've worked for."
"I don't care." "You have to care." She pulled away, pacing the porch. "Don't you see this is what I was afraid of? This is why I wanted a business arrangement. No feelings, no complications. Now he'll use what's between us to hurt you." Jacob caught her shoulders, stilling her. "Emma, stop. Look at me." When she did, he continued. "I've been a coward. For 3 years after Martha died. I've been afraid of feeling anything, afraid of risk, afraid of loss. But you know what? I'm more afraid of letting that bastard take you, living the rest of my life knowing I let fear win again." "Jacob." "No, let me finish. You asked me once if Martha would want me living like a ghost. She wouldn't, and she damn sure wouldn't want me to let the woman I love face this alone." Emma's breath caught. "Love?" He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I've been trying not to say it, trying to keep that last wall between us. But yes, Emma, I love you, and I won't let him have you." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate. When they broke apart, her eyes were bright with tears and determination. "Then we face him together." "Together? But Emma, we need help, legal help." She nodded. "There's a lawyer in Cheyenne, Mr. Davidson. He helped some of the other creditors navigate the bankruptcy. He might—" "Then we'll go to Cheyenne, tonight, if necessary. What about the ranch? Tom Bradley owes me a favor. He'll watch the stock." Jacob was already planning. "We'll take the documents you have, tell Davidson everything. There has to be a way to fight this." Emma gripped his hands. "And if there isn't, if Whitman has the law on his side—" Jacob's jaw set in a way she'd come to recognize as a stubborn streak. "Then we'll find another way. He can't force you to go with him." "He can if I'm in prison." "That won't happen." "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted. "But I can promise that I'll stand between you and him for as long as I draw breath. That's what you do for the people you love." That night, they prepared for the journey to Cheyenne, gathering documents and packing supplies. But as dawn approached, a rider came thundering up to the ranch. Tom Bradley, disheveled and breathless. "Jacob," he called. "That Whitman fellow, he's been busy in town, talking to everyone, spreading stories about Emma, about theft and worse. He's got folks worked up. There's talk of—" He paused, glancing at Emma apologetically. "There's talk of running her out of town, or worse. Some of the men are drinking at the saloon, getting ideas." Emma sank into a chair. "He's cutting off our escape routes, making it so I have nowhere to turn but him." Jacob loaded his rifle with grim efficiency. Tom, can you still watch the ranch? Course, but Jacob, what are you planning? Jacob looked at Emma, seeing his own resolve reflected in her eyes. We're going to town, to face this head on. That's what he wants, Emma protested. He's manipulating everyone. Then we'll show them who Charles Whitman really is. Jacob's voice was steel. I'm done running from hard things, done letting fear dictate our lives. We face him in the open, in front of everyone. Let the town see the truth. Emma stood slowly, that familiar determination settling over her features. And if they side with him, then we'll know where we stand. He held out his hand. Together. She took it without hesitation. Together, as they prepared to leave for what might be their last stand. Emma thought about the strange turns that had brought her here. She'd answered an advertisement for a loveless arrangement, seeking safety in emptiness. Instead, she'd found a love worth fighting for, a man willing to risk everything for her freedom. Whatever happened in town, she would not go with Whitman. She would not be owned again, and if that meant facing judgment, prejudice, and danger, so be it. She'd found something worth more than safety. She'd found someone who saw her as an equal, a partner, a woman worthy of love and respect. The sun rose blood red over the Wyoming plains as they set out for town, toward a confrontation that would determine their fate once and for all. The night before the confrontation stretched endless and dark. Emma sat at the small desk in her room, writing letters she hoped would never need to be sent, one to a distant cousin in California, another to the lawyer Davidson in Cheyenne. If something happened to her, she wanted the truth documented. Jacob found her there at midnight, still writing by lamplight. You should rest, he said softly. I can't. She set down her pen, turning to face him. I keep thinking about tomorrow, about all the ways it could go wrong. He crossed to her, kneeling beside her chair. Emma, we don't have to do this. We could leave tonight, head for California or Oregon, start fresh where Whitman can't find us, and spend our lives looking over our shoulders. She touched his face gently. No, Jacob, you were right. No more running. She hesitated, then continued. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. If tomorrow goes badly, if Whitman somehow. She swallowed hard. Don't throw your life away trying to save me. This ranch, your future here. Don't sacrifice it all for a lost cause. Jacob's hands covered hers. You're not a lost cause. You're the woman I love. Promise me, she insisted. I promise to do whatever it takes to keep us both alive and free, he said instead. That's all I can give you. They sat together in the darkness, neither wanting to voice the fear that this might be their last night. Finally, Emma stood, drawing him with her. If tomorrow might be the end, she whispered, then tonight, let me be your wife, not in name only, not as a business arrangement, but truly. Jacob's breath caught. Emma, are you sure you don't owe me? She silenced him with a kiss. I owe you nothing. This is what I choose. You're what I choose. In the quiet sanctuary of the night, they came together with a tenderness born of uncertainty and a passion fueled by the possibility of loss. Every touch was a promise, every whispered word a vow more binding than any legal document. They loved with the desperate sweetness of those who know tomorrow offers no guarantees. As dawn broke pale and merciless over the plains, they dressed in their best clothes, Jacob in his funeral suit, now worn for a different kind of reckoning. Emma in a simple but elegant gray dress that matched her eyes. You look beautiful, Jacob said, watching her pin up her hair with steady hands. I want them to see me clearly, she replied, not as the scandal they've imagined, but as who I really am. They rode to town in Jacob's wagon, the rifle prominently displayed beside them. The streets were already busy despite the early hour word had spread that there would be a confrontation. And Willow Creek loved nothing more than high drama. Whitman stood outside the hotel, flanked by his hired men. He dressed for the occasion, too, in an expensive suit that made him look like what he was, a wealthy predator among struggling prey. When he saw them approaching, his smile was triumphant. "Miss Foster," he called as they climbed down from the wagon. "I trust you've come to your senses."
Mrs.
"Thornton," Emma corrected, her voice carrying across the gathering crowd.
"And yes, I've come to end this."
The townspeople pressed closer. Mrs. Patterson and her circle, the men from the saloon, shopkeepers and ranch hands, even Reverend Mills from the church. Jacob spotted Tom Bradley near the general store, rifle in hand, and felt a surge of gratitude for the man's loyalty. "Then you'll honor our arrangement?" Whitman asked, loud enough for all to hear. "There is no arrangement," Emma stated clearly. "There never was. What you proposed wasn't marriage or even employment, it was ownership. And I am not property to be bought." Whitman's expression hardened. "You took money that belonged to creditors. You fled your obligations. These good people should know what kind of woman has been living among them." "Yes," Emma agreed, surprising him. "They should." She turned to face the crowd, her chin high. "My name is Emma Foster. My father was Harold Foster of Foster Shipping. When his business failed, he took his own life rather than face his shame. I was left with nothing but debts I had no part in creating and no means to pay." The crowd murmured, but she continued, her voice growing stronger. "This man, Charles Whitman, offered to help. He would forgive the debts if I became his mistress, not his wife. Mind you, for I wasn't good enough for that. I would live in his house, warm his bed, bear his children, but have no rights, no freedom, no future beyond what he chose to give me." Shocked gasps rose from the women. Mrs. Patterson's face had gone pale. "I refused," Emma continued. "I sold my mother's jewelry, my jewelry, left to me by her will, and used the money to come here, to start honest work with an honest man. Now, Mr. Whitman claims that was theft, though the jewelry was mine by rights. He wants to use the law to force what he couldn't take by coercion." "Lies," Whitman snarled. "You're twisting the facts." "Am I?" Emma pulled papers from her bag. "I have the will here, stating clearly that my mother's personal effects were mine. I have letters from Mr. Whitman describing his arrangement in terms that would make decent folks blush. Shall I read them aloud?" Whitman's face reddened. "Private correspondence taken without permission. Given to me freely, when you thought I had no choice but to accept your terms." Emma's voice rang with conviction. "You want to talk about theft, Mr. Whitman? Let's talk about how you bought up my father's debts for pennies on the dollar, then demanded full payment from a grieving daughter. Let's talk about how you used your influence to ensure no respectable employment would be offered to me." "Enough," Whitman stepped forward, and Jacob moved to intercept him. "You owe me, woman, one way or another. You'll pay." "No," Jacob said quietly, but his voice carried the kind of authority that made men stop and listen. "She owes you nothing, and you'll get nothing." Whitman's hired guns shifted, hands moving toward their weapons. The crowd stepped back nervously. "Careful, Thornton," Whitman warned. "I have the law on my side." "Do you?" Jacob asked. "Because I had an interesting conversation with Judge Carter this morning. Turns out he's very interested in reviewing those debt documents, especially after I mentioned the warehouse fire and your convenient timing in acquiring the debts just days before." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Whitman's eyes. Emma stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "You called me property, Mr. Whitman, said I was bought and paid for, but I am not merchandise. I am not cattle to be branded. I am a free woman who chose to come here, chose to work honestly, chose to marry a man who sees me as an equal, and I choose to stand against you." "Pretty words," Whitman sneered. Recovering his composure, But words won't change the law. You'll come with me, or I'll see you arrested."
"Then you'll have to go through me," Jacob said simply.
"And me," Tom Bradley called out, stepping forward.
"And me," added another voice, Ben Morrison, the ranch hand who'd made unwelcome advances. "I may have been a fool, ma'am, but I know wrong when I see it."
One by one, others stepped forward. Not everyone. Some hung back, uncertain or unconvinced, but enough to show that Emma wasn't alone, wasn't friendless. Whitman's face contorted with rage. "You think this rabble frightens me? I have influence, money." "But not here," Reverend Mills interrupted, moving through the crowd. "Mr. Whitman, I've been listening, and I'm troubled. The arrangement you describe, it goes against everything sacred about marriage, everything moral about how men should treat women. I think it's time you left our town."
"You can't force me to leave. I have rights."
"Yes."
Sheriff Coleman finally spoke up, having watched the entire exchange from his office doorway. "You do. You have the right to file your claims in court, proper-like, and Mrs. Thornton has the right to defend herself, with a lawyer and evidence. But what you don't have is the right to threaten folks or disturb our peace." He hooked his thumbs in his gun belt. "So I'm suggesting you and your boys head back to wherever you came from. Come back with a court order if you must. But until then, you're not welcome here."
Whitman looked around at the faces surrounding him, some sympathetic, many hostile, all watching to see what he would do. His hired guns were outnumbered, and more importantly, the easy victory he'd expected had turned into a public relations disaster.
"This isn't over," he said finally, his voice low and venomous. "You think you've won something here? I'll be back with the lawyers, with court orders. I'll destroy you both."
"Maybe," Jacob agreed calmly.
"But not today. Today, you leave."
For a long moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Whitman turned sharply. Gesturing to his men, they mounted their horses and rode out of town, Whitman's back rigid with fury. As the dust settled, Emma swayed slightly, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation suddenly ebbing. Jacob caught her, supporting her as the crowd began to disperse.
"Mrs.
Patterson approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Thornton," she began, then paused, seeming to struggle with words.
I misjudged you. What that man proposed, no decent woman should have to endure such things."
Emma managed a tired smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means more than you know." As they made their way back to the wagon, Sheriff Coleman stopped them. "You know he'll likely make good on his threats. Men like that don't give up easy." "We know," Jacob replied, "but we'll be ready. See that you are. And Thornton, that was a brave thing you both did today. Takes courage to stand up in front of everyone like that." They drove home in exhausted silence, the morning's events settling over them like dust. Emma leaned against Jacob's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence.
"It's not over,"
she said quietly as their ranch came into view. "No," he agreed, "but we faced him down once. We can do it again. Together. Always together." That night, as they lay in each other's arms in the bed they now openly shared, Emma thought about the nature of courage. She'd thought it meant standing alone, needing no one. But real courage, she was learning, was standing together, letting others see your struggles and trusting them to stand with you. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Whitman would return with legal weapons instead of guns. But tonight, she was home, in the arms of a man who loved her as an equal, in a community that had chosen to protect rather than condemn. It wasn't the safety she'd sought when she answered that advertisement. It was something better. It was freedom, hard-won and precious, defended by love and courage and the simple determination to live as more than property. "No more running," she whispered into the darkness. "No more running," Jacob agreed,
pulling her closer. Whatever comes, we face it here, on our land, on our terms. And in the vast Wyoming night, under stars that had witnessed countless struggles for freedom and dignity, they slept the sleep of those who have chosen to stand and fight rather than kneel and submit. The weeks following Whitman's departure brought an unexpected peace to Willow Creek. News of the confrontation spread through the territory, and with it, a shift in how people saw Emma. She was no longer the mysterious beauty with a suspicious past, but a woman who had stood up to power and won, at least for now. Judge Carter had indeed taken interest in the case, requesting all documentation be sent to Cheyenne for review. The lawyer Davidson proved eager to help, especially after examining Whitman's letters and the questionable timing of his debt acquisitions. "This man overreached," Davidson wrote. "His claims are built on sand, and I believe we can prove it." With the immediate threat diminished, life at the ranch took on new rhythms. Emma threw herself into improvements with renewed energy, and the land responded. The garden flourished under her care, producing enough vegetables not just for their table but to sell in town. The new well Jacob had dug continued to flow strong, allowing them to expand the vegetable plots and even consider increasing their small herd. It was on a clear morning in late September that Emma stood in what had once been Martha's garden, now transformed and thriving. She was planning where to plant winter vegetables when she heard Jacob's footsteps behind her. "We should expand the fence line," she said without turning. "Include that southern slope. The soil there would be perfect for potatoes." Already thinking about next season, his arms came around her from behind, and she leaned into his warmth. "I'm thinking about many seasons," she admitted. "Years, even. Is that too presumptuous?" "No." His voice was rough with emotion. "It's exactly right." They stood together, looking over their land, truly their land now, not his with her as a guest, but theirs together. The transformation went beyond the improved garden and new well. The house itself seemed brighter. Filled with small touches, Emma had added curtains she'd sewn from fabric bought with her egg money, wildflowers in mason jars on the window sills, a rag rug by the hearth that made the room feel warmer. "I want to take you somewhere," Jacob said suddenly. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." Emma turned in his arms, studying his face. She saw nervousness there and understood immediately. "Martha's grave." He nodded. "I haven't been since before you came. I couldn't face it. But now—" He took a breath. "I'd like to introduce my wife to my wife. Does that sound mad?" "No," Emma said softly. "It sounds like healing." They walked to the small cemetery plot on the hill overlooking the ranch. It was a peaceful spot, with a view of the mountains in the distance and wildflowers growing between the markers. Martha's stone was simple but well carved. Martha Ellen Thornton, beloved wife, 1,850 to 1,871 inches. Emma had brought flowers from the garden, late roses that had bloomed after the rains. She knelt and placed them gently at the base of the stone. "Hello, Martha," she said quietly. "I'm Emma. I'm sorry we couldn't meet properly, but I want you to know that I'm taking care of him. He speaks of you often, with such love. You shaped him into the man he is, strong, loyal, kind. Thank you for that." Jacob's hand found her shoulder, gripping tight. Emma continued, "I'm not trying to replace you. I couldn't if I wanted to. You'll always be his first love, the one who taught him how to love at all. But I hope you'd be glad he's not alone anymore. I hope you'd approve of what we're building together." She stood, taking Jacob's hand. He was crying silently, tears tracking down his weathered face. "She would," he said hoarsely. "She would approve. She always said I needed someone to challenge me, to push me forward when I got stuck in my ways. She would have liked your spirit, your strength." They stood together in the afternoon sun, hands clasped, past and present somehow reconciled in that moment. When they finally turned to go,
Jacob paused, looking back at the grave. "I'll visit more often now," he promised. "Both of us will. You're part of our story, Martha, always." As they walked back down the hill, Emma felt something shift, like a door closing gently on one chapter while another opened wide. She thought about the letter she'd answered months ago, a cold proposition from a bitter man seeking a business arrangement. How strange that such a beginning had led to this love, partnership, a future bright with possibility. In town, the changes were equally apparent. Mrs. Patterson, chastened by her misjudgment, had become, if not warm, then at least cordial. She'd even invited Emma to join the church auxiliary, a mark of acceptance that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. "You've got a good head for figures, Mrs. Patterson admitted grudgingly after Emma helped balance the auxiliary's books. "We could use someone like you on the school board." The idea of being part of the town's civic life, of building something larger than just their ranch, appealed to Emma. She and Jacob discussed it that evening over dinner, a proper meal at their kitchen table, no longer eaten in awkward silence but with easy conversation. "You should do it," Jacob encouraged. "The town needs people who aren't afraid to stand up for what's right. Like you did for me." "Like we did together," he corrected. "That's the thing about facing down bullies. Once you do it once, it gets easier." They were washing dishes together, a simple domestic task that had become one of Emma's favorite times of day. When she felt the first wave of nausea, she gripped the edge of the sink, waiting for it to pass. "Emma," Jacob's voice was concerned. "Are you all right?" "Yes, Another wave hit, and suddenly she knew. The tiredness she'd attributed to hard work, the tenderness in her breasts she'd ignored, the fact that her monthly courses were late. "Oh, what is it? Are you ill?" She turned to face him, seeing her own wonder reflected in his concern. "No, not ill, Jacob. I think I might be with child." The plate he was drying slipped from his hands, shattering on the floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. Jacob's face had gone through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, and back to joy. "A baby." His voice was barely a whisper. "Our baby." Emma nodded, tears starting to fall. "I'm not certain, but the signs. We should see Doc Morrison to be sure, but I think so." Jacob crossed to her in 2 strides, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, mindless of the broken pottery. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in every syllable. "Emma, a baby." She laughed through her tears, holding him tight. "Are you happy?" "Happy," he set her down gently, cupping her face in his hands. I don't have words. I thought I'd never have this chance. After Martha, I thought—" He stopped, taking a shaky breath. "I love you so much. I love you too," Emma whispered. "But Jacob, what if Whitman—" "No!" His voice was firm. "We're not going to let fear of him shadow this joy. We'll deal with whatever comes. But this moment, this news, it's ours." They told no one at first, wanting to be certain. Doc Morrison confirmed Emma's suspicion a week later, estimating the baby would arrive in the spring. "Everything looks fine," he assured them. "Mrs. Thornton, you're healthy and strong. Just don't overdo the heavy work." "I'll make sure of that," Jacob said firmly, already in protective mode. Emma rolled her eyes fondly. "I'm not made of glass, Jacob." "No," he agreed. "You're made of something much stronger, but you're carrying our future now." As autumn deepened into winter, they prepared for both the baby and whatever legal challenges might still come. The lawyer Davidson wrote with good news. His research had uncovered irregularities in Whitman's business dealings that went far beyond Emma's case. "The man is under investigation for fraud in 3 states, Davidson reported. "I doubt he'll risk drawing attention to himself with a court case now." Still, they remained watchful. Emma learned to shoot better, practicing until she could hit targets at 50 yards. Jacob reinforced the house's doors and shutters. But as the weeks passed with no word from Whitman, they began to believe they might truly be free. The first snow came early, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Emma stood at the window, one hand on her still flat belly, watching Jacob feed the cattle. He moved through the snow with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his element, and her heart swelled with love for him. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she fled Baltimore. It was harder in some ways. The isolation, the physical demands, the ever-present challenges of weather and land. But it was also richer than anything she could have dreamed. She had a partner who valued her mind as much as her beauty, a community that had ultimately chosen to protect rather than exile her, and now a child growing beneath her heart. When Jacob came inside, shaking snow from his coat, she was ready with hot coffee and fresh bread. He kissed her thoroughly before sitting down, a habit that still made her pulse race. "I've been thinking," he said, warming his hands around the mug. "That south pasture, we could build a second house there. Nothing fancy, but Tom Bradley's been looking for a place. If we hired him full-time, gave him a house as part of his wages, we'd have help when the baby comes." Emma finished, smiling at his transparency. "And protection, if we ever need it." "Is it too cautious?" "No," she said, covering his hand with hers. "It's smart, and Tom's a good man. He stood with us when it mattered." They spent the evening planning the house for Tom, expanding the herd come spring, perhaps adding fruit trees to the garden. With each plan, they were building not just a ranch, but a legacy, something to pass on to the child Emma carried and any others that might follow. That night, as snow continued to fall softly outside their window, Emma lay in Jacob's arms and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a cold advertisement to a confrontation with her past, from a business arrangement to a love that grew stronger each day, it seemed impossible. Yet here they were. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked, his hand resting protectively over her stomach. "About how strange life is," she murmured. "How what we think we want and what we actually need can be so different. You wanted a plain bride." "And got so much more than I deserved," he finished. "Emma, that man I was when I wrote that letter, bitter, closed off, afraid I barely recognize him now, you brought me back to life." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's what partners do." As sleep took them, the snow continued to fall, covering the harsh landscape in gentle white, hiding the scars of drought and struggle under a blanket of new beginnings. Come spring, their child would be born into a world made ready by love and courage, protected by parents who had learned that the strongest walls are not those that shut others out, but those built together against whatever storms might come. Winter settled over the Wyoming plains like a heavy quilt, muffling the world in snow and silence. But inside the Thornton ranch house, warmth and life flourished. Emma, now visibly pregnant, moved more slowly but with no less determination, transforming their home into a haven against the cold. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with purpose. Tom Bradley had accepted their offer eagerly, and the small cabin they'd built for him stood sturdy against the winter winds. Having another trusted soul on the property brought peace of mind, especially as Emma's pregnancy advanced. "You're nesting," Jacob observed one snowy afternoon, watching her rearrange the furniture in what would be the baby's corner of their bedroom, like a mama bird. Emma paused, hands on her back, stretching. "Is that so strange I want everything perfect when she arrives?" Jacob raised an eyebrow, moving to massage her aching back. "So certain it's a girl." "A feeling," Emma admitted, leaning into his touch. "Though I'll be equally happy with a boy who has your eyes and your stubborn streak." "My stubborn streak," he laughed. "Woman, you stared down Charles Whitman in the middle of Main Street. Our child doesn't stand a chance of being anything but headstrong." They were still laughing when Tom knocked at the door. bringing news from town along with supplies. That lawyer Davidson sent another letter, he said, producing the envelope. And Mrs. Patterson asked me to give you this. He held out a carefully wrapped package. Emma opened the letter first, Jacob reading over her shoulder. Davidson's news was better than they dared hope. Whitman had been arrested in Baltimore on charges of fraud and extortion. Multiple victims had come forward, inspired by Emma's public stand. He would be facing trial and likely prison.
It's over,
Emma breathed, sinking into a chair.
It's really over.
Jacob knelt beside her, taking her hands.
How do you feel?
Free, she said simply.
For the first time in years, truly free.
The package from Mrs. Patterson contained a beautifully knitted baby blanket and a note. For the little one. May they inherit their mother's courage and their father's strength. Abigail Patterson. Emma traced the delicate stitches with wondering fingers.
She spent hours on this. Why?
Because people can change, Jacob said softly. You showed her that. You showed the whole town that appearances and circumstances don't define a person's worth. As winter deepened, they prepared for spring and the baby's arrival. Jacob built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth as silk. Emma sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flying in the lamplight. Together, they chose names Rose for a girl, after the flowers that had bloomed following the drought, and William for a boy, after Jacob's father. The days took on a peaceful rhythm despite the harsh weather. Mornings began with Jacob tending the stock while Emma prepared breakfast. Days were spent on the endless tasks of ranch life, mending, planning, preparing. Evenings found them by the fire, Jacob often reading aloud while Emma sewed. The domestic scene a far cry from the lonely isolation of a year ago. It was on such an evening in late February that Emma suddenly gasped, her sewing dropping to the floor. What is it? Jacob was beside her instantly.
I think it's time.
She gripped his hand as another wave of pain washed over her. The baby's coming. Jacob fought down panic. They'd prepared for this. But the nearest midwife was in town, a treacherous journey in the current blizzard. Tom! He shouted, and their hired man appeared quickly.
Ride for Mrs. Hartley. Tell her the baby's coming.
In this storm, Tom looked out at the swirling snow. Take the strongest horse. Be careful, but hurry. As Tom disappeared into the blizzard, Jacob turned back to Emma. Her face was pale, but determined. Looks like it might just be us for a while, she said, managing a weak smile. We've faced worse odds. Jacob replied, trying to sound confident. Remember, we're partners. The hours that followed tested them both. Emma labored with the same quiet strength she'd shown facing down Whitman, while Jacob did everything he could to help, drawing on half-remembered knowledge from helping with calving season. Between contractions, they talked, keeping fear at bay with memories and plans. Remember when you first arrived, Jacob said, wiping her brow with a cool cloth.
I was so disappointed you weren't playing.
Emma laughed weakly. And I was terrified you'd send me back. Never. Even then, even trying to deny it, I think I knew you were exactly what I needed. What we needed, Emma corrected, then cried out as another contraction hit. The storm raged on, and still no sign of Tom or the midwife. Jacob began to accept they would have to do this alone. He boiled water, gathered clean linens, and prayed harder than he'd ever prayed before.
Jacob!
Emma gasped during a brief respite.
If something happens,
nothing will happen. You're the strongest woman I know.
Listen to me.
Her gray eyes were fierce despite the pain.
If you have to choose, save the baby.
I won't lose either of you, he said firmly. We're all going to get through this. Together. As dawn broke gray and still stormy, Emma's cries changed pitch.
The baby,
she gasped.
I can feel.
And then, with Jacob's shaking hands ready to catch new life, their daughter, entered the world. She was tiny but perfect, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that proved themselves immediately with a healthy wail.
A girl,
Jacob breathed, cleaning her gently and wrapping her in the blanket. Mrs. Patterson had made. Emma, she's beautiful. Emma, exhausted but radiant, reached for their daughter. As she cradled the baby for the first time, tears streamed down her face.
"Hello, Rose,"
she whispered.
"We've been waiting for you."
The door burst open just then. Tom had returned with Mrs. Hartley, both covered in snow but safe. The midwife took over efficiently, checking both mother and baby, declaring them healthy despite the dramatic arrival.
"You did well,"
she told Jacob.
"Not many men could have managed that."
"I had a good teacher," he said, eyes on Emma, the bravest woman in Wyoming. As the storm finally cleared, word spread quickly through Willow Creek. Visitors began arriving as soon as the roads were passable, neighbors bringing food, gifts, and good wishes. Even Ben Morrison came, hat in hand, with a wooden rattle he'd carved himself. "For the little one," he said awkwardly. "And to say again how sorry I am for my behavior before. You and your husband showed more grace than I deserved." Spring arrived with its usual fanfare of wildflowers and warming winds. Emma, recovered from the birth, stood in her thriving garden with Rose in a sling across her chest, planning the season's planting. The ranch was prospering, the cattle healthy, the wells flowing, the land yielding its bounty to those who worked it with respect and determination. Jacob found them there, his approach announced by Rose's delighted gurgle at seeing her father. He wrapped his arms around both of them, his little family, his whole world. "Tom says there's a family looking for land to the south," he said. "Good people, hard workers, town's growing." "And we helped build it," Emma said with satisfaction. "Not just the buildings, but the community. The understanding that people deserve second chances, that courage matters more than gossip." Speaking of which, Jacob pulled a letter from his pocket. "This came today." Emma recognized the handwriting, her cousin in California, the one she'd written to during those dark days before confronting Whitman. She opened it one-handed, scanning quickly, then laughing. "What is it?" "She's heard our story. Apparently, it's traveled farther than we thought. She writes that 3 women in her town have been inspired to leave bad situations, to seek better lives. She calls me brave." Emma shook her head in wonder. "I wasn't brave. I was desperate." "You were both," Jacob said. "And that's what real courage is, doing what needs to be done even when you're scared." Rose fussed, and Emma adjusted her position, starting to walk back toward the house. Jacob fell into step beside her, and she thought about their journey from that first awkward meeting at the train station to this moment, walking their land with their daughter, building a future neither had dared imagine. "You know," Emma said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about that advertisement you placed, seeking a plain bride for a business arrangement." Jacob groaned. "Will I never live that down?" "Never," she agreed cheerfully. "But I was thinking, what if we placed a different kind of advertisement? There might be other women like I was, trapped in bad situations, needing a new start. We have land now, stability, we could help." Jacob considered this. "Offer employment safe passage?" "A chance," Emma said simply. "The way you gave me a chance, even if you didn't mean to." He pulled her close, careful of Rose between them. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only 3 times, she teased. "You're slipping." "I love you," he said seriously. "You and Rose and whatever other children we're blessed with. You turned a bitter man's last resort into a love story. You brought light back into my life." "We brought light to each other," Emma corrected. "That's what the best partnerships do." As they reached the house, Emma turned for one last look at their domain, the garden ready for planting, the cattle grazing peacefully, the mountains standing eternal guard in the distance. Tom was working on the fence, whistling cheerfully. Smoke rose from their chimney into the clear spring sky. "I spent 3 years thinking I had nothing left to lose," Jacob said quietly, following her gaze. "Then you arrived and showed me I was wrong. I had everything to gain. I just needed to be brave enough to reach for it." "We both did," Emma said, shifting Rose to her other arm. "We both needed to learn that sometimes what we think we want, safety, isolation, protection from pain, isn't what we need at all. Sometimes we need to risk our hearts to find our homes." "No more mail-order brides for me," Jacob said firmly. "I found the only one I'll ever need." Emma laughed, the sound carrying across their land like a blessing. "Good, though I think our daughters should choose their own paths. Don't you know advertisements needed?" "Agreed. They'll be raised to know their worth, to stand tall, to choose love over fear." They went inside together, to the home they'd built from loneliness and determination, from courage and trust. The table Jacob had eaten at alone for 3 years now would host family dinners. The rooms that had echoed with silence would ring with children's laughter. The love they'd both thought lost forever had not only been found, but had multiplied. Creating something larger than either had dared dream. Outside, the Wyoming plains stretched endlessly under the vast sky. Still harsh, still demanding, but no longer empty. For in a weathered house on a thriving ranch lived proof that sometimes the greatest risks yield the richest rewards, and that love, when given the chance, can bloom even in the most unlikely soil. The story of the cowboy who waited for a plain bride had become something else entirely, a testament to the power of seeing beyond surfaces, of choosing courage over comfort, of two broken people creating something whole and beautiful together. And as spring turned toward summer, as Rose grew strong in her parents' love, as the ranch prospered under partnered hands, the tale continued, not an ending, but a beginning of all the seasons yet to come. Thank you all for listening to this Wild West love story. I'm curious to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of frontier romance and courage. Please comment below and let me know what corner of the globe you're listening from. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories of love, adventure, and triumph in the American frontier. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Emma and Jacob's journey. Did their story touch your heart as it did mine? Share your feelings in the comments, and let's celebrate these tales of courage together.